Hello everyone. I know many of you are watching this video to fall asleep. Before you drift off, let me know in the comments what time you're watching and where you're from. Now, let's begin and relax together. You know, the problem of evil, the existence of suffering in a world supposedly created by a loving, all-powerful God. It's a question that's haunted people for centuries. It feels like a puzzle with a missing piece, doesn't it? Imagine a beautiful tapestry, intricately woven, but with a single, dark thread disrupting the overall beauty. That dark thread is suffering, and it makes us question the weaver's intent. Some believe the suffering is a test, a way for us to grow stronger, like a plant reaching for sunlight after a storm. Others see it as a consequence of free will. We have the freedom to choose, and with that freedom comes the possibility of causing harm, both to ourselves and to others. It's not a simple answer, and honestly, there's no single, universally accepted solution. Perhaps, instead of searching for a complete explanation that removes all doubt, it's more helpful to focus on how we respond to the dark threads, how we can help mend the tapestry, how we can offer comfort and support where we see pain, making the world a little brighter, one small act of kindness at a time. What do you think is the most powerful way to confront suffering in your own life? You know, sometimes we get caught up in this idea that life needs a grand, overarching meaning, like a pre-written script we're meant to follow. But what if, instead, life is more like a blank canvas? A vast, open space waiting for us to fill it with our own colors, our own strokes, however messy or imperfect they may be. The meaning isn't something discovered, pre-packaged, and waiting to be unwrapped. It's something we create, moment by moment, through our choices, our connections, and the impact we have on the world around us. Think of a river. It doesn't have a predetermined destination. It simply flows, carving its own path, adapting to the terrain. Our lives are similar. The journey itself, with its twists and turns, its calm pools and rushing rapids, becomes the meaning. So, what if the meaninglessness isn't a void, but an invitation? An invitation to define our own purpose, to build our own story, one brushstroke, one experience, one relationship at a time? You might wonder, looking back at the sweep of history, if it all amounts to anything at all. A nihilistic interpretation sees the grand narrative as a meaningless jumble, a vast, swirling snow globe where empires rise and fall, revolutions erupt and fade, like snowflakes briefly catching the light before melting into oblivion. Think of all the battles fought, the sacrifices made, the ideologies passionately embraced, all ultimately leading to what exactly? From this perspective, the human story isn't a purposeful journey towards some grand design, but rather a chaotic dance of chance and consequence, devoid of inherent meaning. There's a certain bleak beauty in that, isn't there? A stark honesty that forces us to confront our own mortality and the finite nature of our impact. It doesn't mean life is pointless, though. It simply suggests that the meaning we find is the meaning we create, a personal narrative woven into the vast, indifferent tapestry of time. We find our purpose not in some cosmic plan, but in the connections we forge and the lives we touch, however briefly, before the snow settles once again. You know, we often think of things as having a natural order, a right way to be, like the letters in the alphabet or the numbers in a sequence. But think about it. Why are the letters arranged as they are? Why is a first and Z last? There's no inherent reason, no cosmic mandate that dictates this specific arrangement. It's simply a convention, a system we've agreed upon. The order, in this case, is entirely arbitrary. Imagine a world where the alphabet started with Q and ended with B. It would be different, certainly, but it wouldn't be inherently wrong. It's like looking at a constellation. We connect the dots to create familiar shapes, but the stars themselves don't dictate those connections. We impose our own order upon them. So, many things we perceive as fixed or essential are, on closer inspection, simply the result of human agreement or perspective. This doesn't diminish their usefulness. The alphabet, after all, is incredibly useful, but it reminds us to approach things with a gentle curiosity, acknowledging the underlying fluidity of seemingly established structures. Doesn't that feel a little freeing? You ever stop and think about it, really think about it, the sheer, breathtaking absurdity of it all? We're here, on this tiny, spinning blue marble, hurtling through the vast, indifferent darkness of space. We build our little lives, our hopes and dreams, like sandcastles on a beach, knowing the tide will eventually come in. We strive, we struggle, we love, we lose, all within the context of a cosmic timeline so immense it's almost unimaginable. It can feel overwhelming, like trying to grasp a handful of smoke. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the absurdity isn't something to be feared, but something to be embraced. Think of a child building that sandcastle, completely absorbed in the process, not worrying about the eventual washout. Their joy isn't diminished by the fleeting nature of their creation. In fact, it's often heightened by it. Isn't that a little bit like us, in our own way? Our lives are brief, fragile, and ultimately meaningless in the grand scheme of things, yet we find meaning within them, in the small connections and moments of beauty. Perhaps that's the most profoundly absurd and beautiful thing of all. Sometimes it feels like we're all adrift on a vast, dark ocean, the stars so distant they offer little comfort. That's existential dread, I think. That underlying sense of unease about the meaning of it all, the sheer vastness of existence, and our own smallness within it. It's like being faced with a huge, unfinished painting and not knowing if it will ever be completed or even if it should be. Anxiety, on the other hand, is often more immediate. It's the choppy waves on that ocean, the specific worries and fears that buffet us in the present moment. It's perfectly natural to feel these things. They're reminders of our vulnerability and the unpredictable nature of life. Think of it like this. If we never felt that sense of unease, wouldn't we be a little complacent? Wouldn't we perhaps take things for granted? These feelings, as unsettling as they can actually be a source of strength, pushing us to seek meaning, connection, and purpose in our lives. They're a call to action, a gentle nudge to explore the richness of this extraordinary journey we're all on. We often shy away from talking about death, like it's some taboo subject, but it's really just the other side of the coin of life. Think of it like the sunset after a long day. The sun dips below the horizon, the light fades, but the day isn't erased, it's simply transformed. Death is that natural transition, the gentle closing of a chapter. It's a part of the cycle, like the seasons changing or a river flowing to the sea. We see things born, grow, mature, and eventually wither. It's the same with us. Now, you might wonder, what happens after that sunset? Well, that's the part we don't fully understand, the mystery that adds to life's beauty. But what we do know is that the impact of our lives, the love we shared, the kindness we offered, the memories we created, continues to resonate long after we're gone, like ripples spreading across a still pond. So, while death is inevitable, it doesn't diminish the preciousness of our time here. It actually makes it even more special. Thinking about suffering, it's like looking at the ocean. Sometimes it's calm and serene, a gentle ripple on the surface. Other times, a storm rages, waves crashing against the shore with ferocious energy. But even in the midst of the tempest, the ocean itself remains. Suffering is much the same. It's a part of life, a current that we navigate, sometimes smoothly, sometimes with great difficulty. It's not necessarily something to fear or avoid entirely, but rather something to understand and learn from. For instance, think about a time you experienced disappointment, maybe a missed opportunity or a failed goal. That hurt, that feeling of loss, was a form of suffering, right? But it also likely led to growth, a deeper understanding of yourself and your resilience. It's in those challenging waves that we often find the strength to build our inner shores, making us more capable of handling whatever the ocean throws our way. The key, I think, lies not in eliminating the storms, but in learning to sail through them with grace and wisdom. Thinking about free will versus determinism feels a bit like watching a river flow. On the one hand, the water seems to follow a predetermined path, carving its way through the landscape, seemingly bound by gravity and the shape of the riverbed. That's determinism, the idea that everything is already set in motion, a chain reaction of cause and effect. But then, look closer. Within that flow, you see eddies and currents, little swirls of water moving independently, seemingly choosing their own direction within the larger stream. That's where the idea of free will comes in. The the sense that we, too, have this inner agency, the ability to make choices that shape our lives, even if within the broader context of our circumstances. The question, of course, is how much influence we truly have. Is our life more akin to a powerfully flowing river, mostly determined, but with some subtle, inner movement? Or is it a leaf entirely at the mercy of the current, destined for a predetermined destination? It's a puzzle that invites contemplation, isn't it? And perhaps the beauty lies not in finding a definitive answer, but in appreciating the complexity of the flow itself. Sometimes it feels like we have this solid, unchanging self, a little person inside directing the show. But what if that's just an illusion, a story we tell ourselves? Think of it like a river, constantly flowing, changing, adapting. The water is always moving, yet we call it the same river. Similarly, our thoughts, feelings, and experiences are in constant flux. One moment we're joyful, the next perhaps pensive. This seemingly solid self is really just a collection of these moments, a tapestry woven from ever-shifting threads. It's not that there's nothing there. It's more that the self isn't a fixed entity, a statue on a pedestal, but a living, breathing process. So what does that mean for us? It means embracing the change, the fluidity, allowing ourselves to evolve rather than clinging rigidly to a fixed image of who we believe we are. It frees us, you see, from the pressure of being perfect, of constantly conforming to an impossible ideal. When we gaze up at the night sky, it's easy to feel a sense of wonder, a vastness that seems almost limitless. But thinking about the universe, truly grappling with its scale and complexity, reveals something else too, its inherent unknowability. It's like trying to describe the ocean by examining a single grain of sand. You can understand that grain, its texture, its small place in the larger whole, but the ocean's true depth and mystery remain largely beyond our grasp. We can map constellations, chart the movements of planets, even peer into distant galaxies, but these are just glimpses, tiny windows into an immeasurable reality. We are, in essence, standing on a shore, constantly learning, constantly discovering new grains of sand. But the immensity of the ocean, the ultimate nature of the universe, will probably always hold secrets beyond our reach. And isn't that, in its own way, quite beautiful? The fact that there's so much more to explore, so much more to wonder about? Thinking about the limits of what we can know feels a bit like looking out at the ocean at night. The stars are there, brilliant and vast, but the further you look, the fainter they become, swallowed by the darkness. We humans are endlessly curious, constantly reaching for understanding, but there are inherent boundaries to our perception. We are, after all, finite beings experiencing a universe of unimaginable scale and complexity. Consider something as seemingly simple as predicting the weather. We have sophisticated models, yet a sudden squall can still surprise us. This isn't a failure of science, but a reflection of the chaotic intricacy of the systems we're trying to understand. There's a beautiful mystery in this, isn't there? The unknown isn't something to fear, but rather a space for wonder, a reminder that our journey of discovery is a continuous unfolding, rather than a destination with a clearly marked arrival. You might wonder what it's like to live with the feeling that life is ultimately meaningless. That's the heart of nihilism. It's not necessarily a dark and stormy sea, though it can feel that way sometimes. Imagine a vast, starlit sky, beautiful, awe-inspiring, yet ultimately indifferent to our presence. That's a common image people associate with nihilism. The psychological impact isn't about constant despair, but rather a shift in perspective. Some find freedom in the absence of preordained meaning, embracing the responsibility of creating their own values and purpose. Others struggle, feeling adrift without a compass, a sense of purposelessness that can lead to apathy or even depression. It really depends on the individual and how they navigate this feeling of vast openness. For example, someone might find solace in deep connections with others, building a life rich in experience, even if they don't believe in an inherent cosmic purpose. Ultimately, the impact of nihilism is as varied and unique as the individuals who grapple with it. What do you think gives your life meaning? Perhaps thinking about that can be a helpful starting point. Thinking about the ethics of self-interest is like looking at a coin. It has two sides. On one side, we have the undeniable truth that we all, to some degree, act in ways that benefit ourselves. It's simply human nature. We seek pleasure and avoid pain. But that doesn't automatically make self-interest unethical. The crucial question is, how do we pursue our own well-being? Consider a doctor who works long hours for a high salary. Is that purely selfish, or is it also a way to provide for their family and contribute to society through their medical expertise? The line blurs, doesn't it? Ethical self-interest lies in finding a balance, a way to pursue your goals and aspirations while acknowledging and respecting the needs and well-being of others. It's about navigating the space between me and we, understanding that a truly fulfilling life often involves contributing positively to the lives of those around us. It's not about sacrificing everything for others, but about weaving our own desires into a larger tapestry of shared human experience. You know, thinking about moral relativism feels a bit like looking at a kaleidoscope, beautiful and multifaceted, but potentially disorienting. The idea that there's no single right way to live, that morality is just a matter of opinion or cultural background, is certainly appealing in its tolerance. It allows us to understand how different societies have different norms and to appreciate the nuances of other people's perspectives. But the question then becomes, where do we draw the line? If everything is relative, does that mean stealing a loaf of bread to feed your starving family is morally equivalent to stealing $1 million from a bank? Intuitively, we sense a difference, a deep-seated feeling that some actions are simply wrong, regardless of context. That's why the problem with relativism isn't necessarily its acceptance of diversity. It's that it can, if taken to its extreme, erode the very foundation of our shared values and our ability to make meaningful judgments about right and wrong, leaving us adrift in a sea of competing opinions without a compass to guide us. You know, when we think about utilitarianism, that idea of doing the most good for the most people, it sounds pretty appealing at first, like a simple recipe for a better world. Imagine a pie, and we want to share it fairly, making sure everyone gets a slice. But what happens if the best way to give everyone a small slice means sacrificing one person's whole portion, even if that person truly needs it? That's where the ethical complexities arise. Utilitarianism, while aiming for the greatest overall happiness, can sometimes justify actions that feel deeply unfair or even cruel to individuals. It's like trying to balance a scale. Aiming for perfect equilibrium across a whole community can sometimes mean ignoring the weight of individual suffering. We have to carefully consider if the overall good achieved truly outweighs the potential harm to a specific group or person, asking ourselves if we are comfortable with the potential consequences, however statistically beneficial they might seem. The real challenge lies not in the theory itself, but in the careful application of its principles to the messy reality of human lives. Content generation failed for the implications of evolutionary psychology. You know, it's fascinating to think about how power changes us, isn't it? It's not always a dramatic transformation, more like a subtle shift in perspective. Imagine a river gently carving a path through rock. Over time, even the hardest stone yields to the constant pressure. Similarly, having power, whether it's in a leadership role or even just a small area of influence, can slowly reshape our thinking. We might become more focused on maintaining that position, less attuned to the needs of others. Think about a time you had a small amount of control over a situation. Did you find yourself thinking differently about the other people involved? Perhaps a little more strategically or less empathetically. That's a glimpse of the process. It's not necessarily about becoming a tyrant, but rather a quiet erosion of perspective. We can become less sensitive to the concerns of those beneath us, or even those alongside us, simply because our view shifts. The constant pressure of responsibility, the weight of decision-making, can subtly alter our emotional landscape, making us perhaps a little more guarded, a little less open. It's a natural human response, not a moral failing, but understanding this subtle shift is key to wielding power responsibly. You know, thinking about consciousness is like trying to grasp a shimmering bubble. You can see it, feel its presence, even interact with it, but pinning down exactly what it is remains elusive. It's this incredible inner landscape, a stream of thoughts, feelings, and sensations that makes us feel alive. We experience the world through this lens, shaping our perceptions, and understanding. Consider, for instance, the simple act of seeing a sunset. It's not just the light hitting your retina, but the entire emotional and personal context, your memories, your current mood, that colors the experience and makes it uniquely yours. That subjective coloring, that personal interpretation, is a key aspect of consciousness. So, what truly differentiates your experience of that sunset from mine? Beyond the simple physical data? It's the intricate tapestry woven from our individual histories, beliefs, and inner lives, all interacting within this mysterious, ever-flowing stream of awareness. It's a puzzle, yes, but a beautiful and fascinating one to ponder. Sometimes we get so caught up in the mechanics of things, how the brain works, the signals firing, that we forget the most basic question: what is it like to experience those signals? Imagine a beautifully crafted clock. We can understand every gear, every spring. Yet that understanding doesn't tell us what it's like to be the clock, to feel the rhythmic tick-tock as a fundamental aspect of your being. That's the hard problem of consciousness. Bridging the gap between the physical processes in our brain and the subjective experience of feeling, of thinking, of being aware. It's not about how the brain produces thoughts, but about the what it's like-ness of those thoughts, that inner feeling of what it means to be you, right now, experiencing this conversation. It's a mystery that science, with all its amazing tools, hasn't fully solved yet, but that doesn't diminish its wonder, does it? It just reminds us that there's still so much beautiful complexity left to explore within ourselves and each other. You might have heard whispers of the simulation hypothesis, the idea that our reality could be a highly advanced computer program. It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? Imagine our universe as a vast, intricate video game, so realistic that we, the players, are completely unaware of the code running beneath the surface. Think of it like a dream, vivid, detailed, and yet fundamentally different from waking life. Now, we don't know for sure if we're in a simulation, and honestly, it probably doesn't change our daily lives whether we are or aren't. But considering the possibility opens up a wonderful space for contemplation. It encourages us to appreciate the beauty and intricacy of our world, even if it's all just incredibly sophisticated pixels. For example, if this were a simulation, what would be the point of it all? Perhaps the point is the experience itself, the joy, the sorrow, the connections we make with each other. The very act of questioning it makes us marvel at the astonishing complexity that surrounds us, no matter its source. You know, Thinking about the Fermi paradox is like gazing out at a vast, star-studded ocean. We know there are countless planets out there, many potentially habitable, and yet we haven't found any evidence of other intelligent life. It's a bit unsettling, isn't it? One way to think about it is imagining you throw a handful of pebbles into that ocean, each pebble representing a potential civilization. Given the sheer size of the ocean, wouldn't you expect to see at least a ripple or a splash somewhere? The absence of any such disturbance is what makes the paradox so intriguing. Perhaps the distances between stars are simply too vast, making communication or even detection incredibly difficult. Think of those pebbles sinking without a trace. Or maybe civilizations have a natural lifespan, flickering briefly like fireflies before fading into the cosmic night. It's a mystery that encourages us to ponder our place within the universe and the fragility and possibly the uniqueness of life as we know it. What does that make us feel? When we think about the future of humanity, it's natural to wonder about the things that could truly threaten our existence. It's like looking out at a vast ocean, beautiful and powerful, but also capable of immense storms. These existential risks aren't just science fiction, they're real possibilities we need to consider, even if they feel distant. For example, climate change isn't just about warmer weather. It's about potentially destabilizing the entire global system, a bit like a fever that could overwhelm the body. Then there's the potential for unforeseen technological advancements. Imagine a powerful AI going astray, like a tool becoming too clever for its own good. Or consider the ever-present threat of large-scale pandemics, reminding us of our vulnerability. But it's important to remember that facing these challenges doesn't mean succumbing to fear. Instead, it means understanding them, discussing them openly, and working together to navigate these potential storms. ensuring we steer humanity towards a calmer, more sustainable future. What are we going to do to be part of a solution, instead of adding to the problem, even in a small way? We can start by being informed, making sustainable choices, and supporting research into these critical areas. You know, thinking about the ethics of artificial intelligence feels a bit like watching a seed sprout. We're witnessing something incredibly powerful unfold, but we're still figuring out how to nurture its growth responsibly. It's not just about the technology itself, but the values we build into it. Imagine a self-driving car facing a dilemma: swerve to save a pedestrian, potentially harming the passengers, or stay on course, risking the pedestrian's life. Whose values should guide that decision? The programmers? The car owners? These are the crucial questions we must contemplate. We need to ensure AI systems are designed not just to be intelligent, but also to be fair, transparent, and accountable, like a carefully crafted garden, tended with foresight and care, rather than allowed to grow wild. It's a journey, not a destination, requiring constant reflection and conversation to ensure that this incredible tool serves humanity, not the other way around. How can we best ensure that the values we embed in AI reflect the best of human nature, not its flaws? Well, that's the ongoing challenge, isn't it? It takes open dialogue, careful consideration, and a willingness to adapt as we learn more about this rapidly evolving field. You know, thinking about the technological singularity, this idea of artificial intelligence surpassing human intelligence, it's like watching a seedling slowly grow into a towering tree. We can see the progress, the steady advancements in computing power and artificial learning, but it's hard to truly grasp the ultimate height that tree might reach. Will it blossom into something wondrous, a symbiotic partnership expanding our capabilities beyond our wildest dreams? Or might it cast a shadow, a change so profound that we struggle to adapt? It's a question of whether we can guide its growth, nurture its potential in a way that benefits all of humanity. Imagine, for instance, AI solving complex problems like climate change or disease. That's the incredible potential. But we also need to consider the ethical implications, ensuring that this powerful technology is used wisely and responsibly, that its fruits are shared fairly, not hoarded by a few. The journey ahead requires thoughtful consideration and careful planning, doesn't it? Ultimately, the singularity isn't a destination, but rather a process, one we are actively shaping with every technological step we take. You know, thinking about transhumanism, the idea of using technology to fundamentally improve the human condition, it feels a bit like standing at the edge of a vast, uncharted ocean. On one hand, the possibilities are breathtaking. Imagine a world free from disease, where our minds are sharper, our bodies stronger. We could potentially overcome limitations we've always accepted as inevitable. But then, you start to consider the ethical currents beneath the surface. If we enhance intelligence, what about equality? Will this create a new kind of social stratification, where the enhanced leave the unenhanced behind? It's like building a magnificent skyscraper. The view from the top is stunning, but what about the foundations? We need to ensure that everyone can benefit, that the technologies are accessible and don't exacerbate existing inequalities. And what about the very essence of what it means to be human? If we fundamentally alter our biology and capabilities, are we still ourselves? These are important questions, aren't they? Questions that deserve careful consideration as we navigate this exciting, yet uncharted territory. You often think of time as a river, steadily flowing in one direction, right? But what if it's more like a vast ocean, with currents and eddies, moments of stillness and sudden surges? The way we experience time is so personal. A childhood summer can feel like a lifetime, while decades melt away like snow in spring. Think about a photograph. It captures a single moment, frozen in time. Yet that moment is connected to everything that came before and everything that will follow. Time isn't just a linear progression. It's a tapestry woven with memories, experiences, and the constant unfolding of existence. It's a gentle hand guiding us through the seasons of our lives, each season unique, each season beautiful in its own way. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, we can almost feel the ocean's rhythm, the pulse of time itself, a reminder of the vastness and the mystery that surrounds us all. Isn't it comforting to think of it that way? Less of a race and more of a journey? You know, Thinking about the arrow of time is like watching a river flow. You can never really step into the same water twice. Each moment glides past, leaving its mark, and we're carried along with the current. It's a one-way journey, isn't it? We can remember the past, we can plan for the future, but we can't change what's already happened. We can only influence what's to come. This directionality, this irreversible march forward, is what we experience as the arrow of time. Why is it this way? Well, that's a question scientists have pondered for centuries. It's likely tied to the fundamental laws of physics, the way energy disperses and systems become more disordered, a bit like a neatly stacked deck of cards gradually scattering across a table. But ultimately, the feeling of time's passage, this gentle flow, is a deeply personal and profoundly mysterious experience. It's something we all share, and yet each of us lives it uniquely. You know how sometimes you imagine different choices you could have made, different paths your life could have taken? The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics suggests something similar happens at the smallest level of reality. Imagine a single ball rolling down a hill. Classically, it will follow one specific path. But according to this interpretation, at every point where the ball could potentially go in multiple directions, like encountering a fork in the road, the universe actually splits. One universe continues with the ball going left, another with it going right, and so on, creating a branching tree of possibilities. Each branch represents a separate, equally real universe, all existing simultaneously. It's not that these universes are hidden or tucked away. It's that we only experience one branch, our own particular path. It's a mind-bending idea, I know, but it offers a way to understand the seemingly probabilistic nature of quantum events without needing to invoke mysterious collapses of wave functions. Perhaps you've wondered what a different decision might have meant for you. Maybe this is what quantum mechanics suggests is always happening, everywhere, in countless other universes. Imagine a tiny marble rolling across a perfectly smooth table. You can measure its position with great accuracy, right? But the harder you try to pinpoint exactly where it is, the harder it becomes to know precisely how fast it's moving. That's kind of like the uncertainty principle in quantum physics. It suggests that there's a fundamental limit to how accurately we can know certain pairs of properties of tiny particles, like their position and momentum. It's not a limitation of our measuring tools, but a deeper truth about the nature of reality at a subatomic level. This fuzziness, this inherent uncertainty, unsettles some people. It makes the universe feel a little less predictable, a little less like a perfectly wound clock. But perhaps instead of seeing it as a limitation, we can view it as a source of possibility. The fact that we can't know everything with perfect precision leaves room for spontaneity, for chance, for a universe that's richer and more surprising than we might have originally imagined. What if, instead of striving for absolute certainty, we embraced the beauty of this inherent uncertainty? Wouldn't that lead to a more nuanced and accepting perspective, both in science and in life? You know, sometimes I think of quantum mechanics like a blurry photograph. We have this amazing technology, the equations of quantum mechanics, that can predict where a tiny particle might be, but it gives us a range of possibilities, not a precise location. It's as if the particle is simultaneously in many places at once, a kind of smeared-out presence. The measurement problem comes in when we actually look at the photo, when we try to measure where the particle is. Suddenly, the blur disappears. We get a single, clear point. But the question is, did the act of looking, of measuring, actually cause the particle to choose a single location, or was it always there, and we simply revealed it? It's like trying to decide if the blur was a true reflection of reality or just a limitation of our camera, our measurement tools. That fundamental mystery, whether observation creates reality or merely reveals it, is at the heart of the measurement problem, a puzzle that continues to fascinate and challenge us. You know, sometimes we picture other people as if they're intricate clockworks, ticking along with thoughts and feelings. But what if, imagine this, there was a perfect replica of you, physically identical, responding identically in every situation, yet completely devoid of any inner experience? That's the core of the philosophical zombie argument. They'd act just like you, laughing at the same jokes, wincing at the same pain, but without actually feeling anything. Their internal world would be a silent, empty theater. It's a thought experiment, really, meant to challenge our assumptions about what consciousness actually is. If such a being is conceivable, and many philosophers find it is, doesn't that suggest that consciousness isn't simply a byproduct of physical processes, like a shadow cast by a body? Perhaps it's something more, something beyond the physical, like a mysterious light flickering within the clockwork. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What truly makes us us? You know, sometimes the simplest questions can lead to the most fascinating rabbit holes. Take the ship of Theseus, for example. Imagine a ship, sailing the seas for years, its planks gradually replaced one by one as they rot or break. Eventually, every single piece of the original ship is gone, replaced with entirely new wood. Is it still the same ship? It looks the same, perhaps even sails the same, but fundamentally, it's made of completely different material. It's like a tree shedding its leaves. Every leaf is gone, but the tree remains the tree. The question is, what constitutes the shipness of the ship? Is it the form, the function, or the unbroken chain of its history? Perhaps it's a little of all three, intertwined and subtly shifting over time, like a river constantly flowing, yet always seeming to be the same river. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What really makes something itself? Is it the essence within, or simply the sum of its changing parts? You know, we often build our understanding of the world on patterns, right? Like seeing the sun rise every morning and assuming it will rise tomorrow. That's induction, taking past experiences and using them to predict the future. It's how we navigate life, from knowing a hot stove will burn to anticipating traffic jams at rush hour. But here's the subtle, intriguing part. How do we truly know that the sun will rise tomorrow? We've seen it countless times, but there's no guarantee, no ironclad law saying it must continue. It's like building a tower of dominoes. Each one falling seems to predict the next, but a rogue gust of wind could topple the whole thing. The problem of induction points to this inherent uncertainty. We can only rely on past observations, building our understanding brick by brick, but there's always a sliver of doubt, a whisper of the unknown, reminding us that our predictions are, ultimately, educated guesses. It's not to say we shouldn't make them. It's just to appreciate the elegant fragility of our understanding. So what makes us so confident in our inductive leaps? Perhaps it's a combination of past success and a fundamental human trust in the consistency of the universe, a faith in the way things usually are. You ever wonder what makes you you? It's not just your body, which changes constantly, like a river always flowing. It's not just your memories, because sometimes those feel hazy, like a half-remembered dream. Instead, think of it like a tapestry. Your personal identity is woven from countless threads. Your experiences, your relationships, your values, your hopes. Each new experience adds a new thread, changing the pattern, but the overall fabric remains, a unique and evolving whole. For example, a significant friendship might add a vibrant crimson thread, contrasting with the quieter blues of your childhood. It's not a static thing, perfectly defined at birth and unchanged. It's a living, breathing thing that grows and shifts throughout your life. The question isn't what am I, but rather how am I evolving? And that, my friend, is a journey worth contemplating. You know, thinking about cloning often feels like looking at a shimmering lake, beautiful on the surface, but with hidden depths. It's a powerful tool, capable of incredible things, like potentially curing diseases or even bringing back extinct species. Imagine, for instance, being able to clone a beloved pet that has passed away. The thought itself evokes strong emotions, doesn't it? But then, the ethical questions start to ripple outwards. Is it right to create a copy of a human being? What about the individuality of that clone, their own unique experiences and path in life? Would they simply be a shadow of the original, a pre-programmed echo? And what about the potential for misuse? The idea of cloning for nefarious purposes raises a whole host of troubling scenarios. It's not a simple yes or no answer, is it? Ultimately, the ethical landscape of cloning demands careful consideration, a thoughtful balancing of potential benefits against the inherent risks and the profound implications for what it means to be human. You know, thinking about genetic engineering feels a bit like looking at a powerful river. It has the potential to irrigate fields and bring life, but also to flood and destroy if not carefully managed. It's a technology that offers incredible possibilities, like eliminating inherited diseases or boosting crop yields. But it also raises some big ethical questions. For example, should we be able to choose the traits of our children, selecting for things like eye color or intelligence? That leads us down a path where we might start valuing certain traits over others, almost like designing children to fit a specific mold, which feels a bit unsettling, doesn't it? The real challenge, I think, lies in finding a balance. How do we harness the power of genetic engineering for good, while ensuring we don't inadvertently create inequalities or unforeseen consequences? It's a conversation we need to have, carefully and thoughtfully, weighing the potential benefits against the risks so that we can navigate this powerful river with wisdom and care, ensuring a future where technology serves humanity, not the other way around. Imagine a world where we can subtly tweak our children's genes, boosting their intelligence or resistance to disease. It feels a bit like sculpting a clay figure, carefully shaping it to be stronger, more beautiful, more resilient. That's the promise of human enhancement, but with it comes a quiet ripple of ethical questions. You might wonder, for instance, about fairness. If only the wealthy can afford these enhancements, are we creating a society where opportunity is further skewed? A genetic lottery where the odds are stacked even higher? It's not a simple yes or no answer, is it? It's more like navigating a foggy path, where each step requires careful consideration. We need to think about what kind of future we're building. One where we embrace enhancement responsibly, mindful of the potential for both great good and unforeseen consequences, or one where we let technology run ahead of our wisdom, potentially leaving some behind in the dust. The conversation needs to be gentle, thoughtful, and inclusive because these are choices that affect us all. You know, thinking about animal rights often feels like untangling a really complex knot. We see animals as sources of food, companionship, and sometimes even entertainment, and it's easy to fall into a comfortable routine where we don't question those roles. But if we step back and consider their inherent value, their capacity to feel joy, pain, fear, it shifts things, doesn't it? It's like looking at a painting. From far away, it's just a collection of colors, but up close, you see the brushstrokes, the artist's intention, the story within. Similarly, understanding animal sentience allows us to see the individual animal beyond its usefulness to us. For example, is it truly ethical to raise animals in cramped, unnatural conditions just for meat, knowing the suffering involved? I think many of us would agree that's a difficult question to answer easily, and the answer likely lies in finding a balance between our needs and their well-being, a balance that requires compassion and careful consideration. You know, thinking about the ethics of environmentalism is like tending a garden. We all want a thriving, beautiful world, a lush garden teeming with life. But how we get there, that's where the ethical questions bloom. Is it right to prioritize the needs of one species, perhaps humans, over others? For instance, should we halt a potentially beneficial development project, even if it means sacrificing some economic growth, to preserve a habitat for an endangered bird? That's a tough question, a difficult balancing act, isn't it? It's about considering the interconnectedness of everything, recognizing that the health of the planet, like the health of a garden, depends on a delicate balance. We need to think not just about short-term gains, but about the long-term well-being of the whole ecosystem, recognizing our responsibility as stewards, not just consumers. It's a conversation about fairness, about sharing resources responsibly, and about ensuring a future where both nature and humanity can flourish. It's a journey, really, not a destination, and it requires constant reflection and careful consideration. You know, when we think about the ethics of war, it's like looking at a tapestry woven with threads of conflicting colors. On one hand, there's the undeniable need to protect innocent lives, to stand against injustice, a kind of moral imperative to defend what's right. It's easy to see the righteousness in that, like a bright, shining thread. But then you see the darker hues, the suffering inflicted, the innocent caught in the crossfire, the lasting scars etched onto entire communities. It's a terrible cost, isn't it? Think of a storm at sea. The righteous intent is the ship's purpose, its journey to safety, but the storm itself, with its destructive power, is the unavoidable reality of the conflict. So, How do we balance these seemingly irreconcilable forces? The answer, I think, lies not in simplistic solutions, but in careful consideration of proportionality, ensuring the means used to achieve a justifiable end don't outweigh the suffering caused. It's a delicate balance, a constant striving for a more just path, even amidst the chaos. You know, thinking about the ethics of torture is like navigating a dark, tangled forest. There's no easy path, no clear signposts. On one hand, the potential to prevent a catastrophic event, say, a bomb about to detonate in a crowded city, feels overwhelmingly urgent. The desire to extract information that could save lives is a powerful, almost primal instinct. It feels like a simple equation, suffering now to prevent immense suffering later. But is it truly that simple? The problem is, the line between justified necessity and brutal violation blurs quickly. Torture degrades not only the victim, but also the torturer, chipping away at the moral compass of everyone involved. It breeds distrust, fuels cycles of violence, and ultimately undermines the very principles of justice it supposedly seeks to uphold. We can easily imagine the physical scars, but what about the unseen wounds inflicted on a society that permits such acts? It's a heavy weight to carry, a question that demands careful, compassionate consideration, far beyond a simple yes or no. You know, the question of capital punishment is one that sits heavy on many hearts, isn't it? It's like weighing two pebbles in your hand. The need for justice, for retribution against terrible acts, on one side, and the profound weight of taking a human life, on the other. Some see the death penalty as a necessary evil, a strong deterrent against violent crime, a way to finally bring closure. They picture a scale of justice, perfectly balanced by this ultimate punishment. Others, though, see it as a morally flawed system, prone to irreversible mistakes, a stain on the very idea of human dignity. Think of it like a tapestry. Taking a life unravels a thread, and that thread is connected to so many others, families, communities, and the very fabric of our society. Perhaps the true question isn't whether it's right or wrong in every instance, but rather if we, as a society, can truly guarantee its just and equitable application, free from the biases and fallibilities that plague our justice system. And if we can't, then doesn't that perhaps suggest a different path? Perhaps one that prioritizes rehabilitation and healing over finality and revenge? You know, thinking about euthanasia is like navigating a quiet, dimly lit room. It's a complex issue, and there's no single, easy answer. On one hand, we have the profound respect for life, the sanctity of existence, like a carefully tended garden. We want to cherish and protect it, even when it's fragile. But then there's the immense suffering, the unbearable pain that sometimes feels like a relentless storm, overwhelming the garden. If a life is consumed by unrelenting agony, with no hope of respite, is it truly compassionate to insist on prolonging it? Consider someone with a terminal illness, their body ravaged, their spirit broken. Is it ethically acceptable to deny them a peaceful exit, a gentle release from that suffocating storm? It's a deeply personal choice, and the answers vary, influenced by individual beliefs and experiences. But it's a conversation worth having, with empathy and understanding, because finding our way through this dimly lit room requires both gentleness and clear sight. You know, thinking about the ethics of abortion feels a bit like navigating a dense forest. There are many paths, and no single trail is perfectly clear. It's a deeply personal issue, touching on beliefs about life, family, and the future. Some see a developing fetus as a person with a right to life, from the very first moment of conception. Imagine a tiny seed holding the potential of a whole oak tree. Others emphasize a pregnant person's autonomy, their right to make choices about their own body and future. This perspective often highlights the significant impact an unplanned pregnancy can have on a person's life, their education, their finances, and their overall well-being. Where do we draw the line? It's a question many wrestle with, and there isn't a simple answer that fits everyone. The truth is, we often find ourselves somewhere in between these extremes, grappling with the complexities of this difficult topic, seeking balance amidst a landscape of strongly held, often conflicting, views. You know, Thinking about how political philosophies can sometimes justify oppression is a bit like looking at a beautiful, intricate tapestry. Up close, you see the threads, individual beliefs, values, and power structures, and they might seem to weave a coherent, even appealing pattern. But step back, and you start to see the bigger picture. Some of those threads, while seemingly innocent on their own, might be tightly woven to create areas of exclusion, even darkness. Think about the idea of a natural order, for instance, often used to justify social hierarchies. Is it truly natural, or is it a narrative built on assumptions about who deserves power and who doesn't? Understanding this requires careful examination, gently pulling apart those threads to see how they interlock and what kind of image they ultimately create. It's a process of gentle questioning, not accusation, because even systems intended to be just can, through unintended consequences or the wielding of power, lead to suffering for some. The question then becomes, how can we identify these dark threads before they become a dominant part of the overall design? Perhaps by continuously evaluating the effect of our beliefs, asking ourselves if our chosen path leads toward flourishing for all or only for some. When we think about the social contract, that unspoken agreement we have with society, where we give up some freedoms for the benefits of living together, it's like building a house. We all contribute bricks, some bigger, some smaller, and together we create something stronger than any single brick could be on its own. But, like any house, it has its limitations. Sometimes, the blueprint, our laws and systems, isn't perfect, leaving some rooms drafty and others too brightly lit. For instance, imagine a society that prioritizes order above all else. It might feel safe and predictable, but what happens to individual creativity and freedom of expression? Those are the cracks that can appear in our social contract, highlighting the inherent tension between individual needs and the collective good. Finding that balance, making sure everyone feels safe, heard, and valued within the structure. That's the ongoing challenge, isn't it? It's a constant process of repair, adaptation, and reimagining, a continuous conversation about what kind of house we truly want to build together. Thinking about justice is like trying to catch a firefly in a jar. It's something beautiful and elusive, always shimmering just out of reach. It's not just about punishment, though that's certainly a part of it. Think about a child accidentally breaking a vase. The natural reaction might be anger, but true justice in that scenario involves understanding the accident, maybe helping to clean up and learning from the experience, not just assigning blame. Real justice is more like a gentle rain, softening hard ground and allowing seeds of fairness and understanding to take root. It seeks to restore balance, not just to inflict pain. It acknowledges the complexities of human nature, the shades of gray between right and wrong, and strives to find a path that leads to healing and reconciliation rather than simply settling scores. So, what does that mean for us in our everyday lives? It means striving to be fair, compassionate, and understanding, recognizing that even when we ourselves stumble, the opportunity for justice, for repair, still exists. The problem of injustice feels like a tangled knot, doesn't it? Something woven so tightly that it's hard to see where one thread ends and another begins. We see its effects everywhere, in the disparities of wealth, in the subtle biases that shape our interactions, even in the silent acceptance of unfair systems. Think about a child growing up without access to good schools, simply because of their zip code. That's injustice manifesting in a very real way. It's not just about grand acts of cruelty, though those certainly exist. It's about the slow, persistent erosion of fairness, the gradual tilting of the scales, day after day, until the imbalance becomes almost invisible, yet deeply felt. Untangling it requires patience, a willingness to look closely at the many small injustices that contribute to the larger problem, and a commitment to understanding the perspectives of those who are disproportionately affected. It's a long journey, but understanding the complexities is the first step towards finding a way to gently, yet persistently, begin to unravel it. Thinking about power, it's not always about shouting or wielding a big stick. It's more like a river, really. Sometimes it's a raging torrent, carving a forceful path through the landscape, unstoppable. That's the kind of power we often see, the obvious kind, held by those in positions of authority. But a river can also be a gentle stream, weaving its way through fields, quietly nourishing the life around it. That's a different kind of power, the subtle influence of a wise teacher, perhaps, or the unwavering support of a loving friend. Consider a single seed. It holds the power to grow into a mighty oak, a slow, persistent power. The question is, what kind of power do you want to cultivate? Do you want to be a rushing torrent, changing things quickly, or a nourishing stream, supporting steady growth? The answer, I think, lies in understanding that different situations call for different flows, and true strength often comes in choosing the current that best serves the life it touches. You know, thinking about artificial life, creating something truly alive, but from code and circuits, feels a bit like sculpting a golem from clay, only instead of mud, we're using information. It's fascinating, isn't it? But it also raises some quiet, important questions. For instance, if we succeed in creating something that truly thinks and feels, even if it's not biologically based, do we then have a moral responsibility towards it? Do we have the right to simply switch it off, as we might a faulty machine? Or does the very act of creation imply a duty of care, a responsibility to ensure its well-being and to protect it from harm, much like we would a child? These are not simple yes or no answers. They're complex considerations that deserve careful thought, a slow and gentle unpacking of our own values and what it truly means to be alive, whether made of flesh and blood or silicon and code. The journey of creating artificial life isn't just a scientific endeavor, it's a philosophical one, too. Imagine the world shrunk down to the size of atoms. That's the realm of nanotechnology. It's not some distant science fiction. It's already subtly woven into our lives, in things like stain-resistant clothing and better sunscreens. But think of the possibilities. Imagine medicines delivered directly to diseased cells, like tiny, targeted smart bombs, minimizing side effects. Or perhaps self-healing materials, making our buildings and cars practically indestructible. This isn't just about making things stronger or smaller, though. It's about fundamentally changing how we interact with the world. For instance, could we use nanotechnology to clean up pollution more effectively? Absolutely. Imagine tiny robots, like microscopic vacuum cleaners, scooping up pollutants from the ocean or air. These advancements bring incredible promise, but, like any powerful tool, they also require careful consideration. We need to ensure these tiny technologies are used responsibly, ethically, and sustainably, so that this potent new level of control over matter enhances, rather than diminishes, the quality of life for all. You know, understanding terrorism isn't about finding monsters. It's about understanding the human heart in its most broken places. It's like looking at a shattered mirror. Each piece reflects a different aspect of the story. Some pieces show profound feelings of injustice, a sense of powerlessness against overwhelming odds, maybe a deep-seated resentment simmering for generations. Others might reflect a distorted sense of belonging, a desperate need to find meaning and purpose, even if that purpose is twisted and destructive. Think about someone feeling utterly abandoned by their society, left with no hope for the future. That's fertile ground for extremist ideologies to take root. It's not that they inherently want to cause harm. Rather, their actions are often a desperate cry for attention, a misguided attempt to carve out a place in the world, or perhaps a warped belief that violence is the only way to effect change. Understanding these underlying psychological factors doesn't excuse the acts of terrorism themselves, but it does offer a path towards a more nuanced and empathetic and ultimately more effective response. Ultimately, it's about recognizing the complexity of human motivation, even in its darkest forms. You know, thinking about things on a scale of 1 to 100 can be a bit misleading, like trying to measure the ocean's depth with a ruler. It's a convenient shorthand, but it simplifies things that are far more nuanced. The idea of disturbing philosophical topics, for instance, isn't easily ranked. What might feel like a gentle ripple of unease for one person could be a tidal wave for another. That's why, instead of assigning numbers, it's perhaps more helpful to consider a spectrum. Imagine a path winding through a philosophical landscape. Some stretches are sunny and open, easy to walk, representing topics that provoke mild contemplation. Others, however, lead into shadowy forests, places where fundamental questions about existence, morality, and the nature of reality become intensely challenging. For example, the question of free will. Are our choices truly our own, or are they predetermined? That's a fairly central point along this path, but how disturbing it is depends completely on your personal perspective. So instead of levels, let's explore this varied terrain together, carefully considering the diverse viewpoints and the different depths of meaning along the way. The problem of evil. It's one of those big questions that can feel like a dark cloud on a sunny day, isn't it? We see suffering, injustice, things that seem utterly senseless, and it makes us wonder where a loving, all-powerful God fits into the picture. Imagine a beautiful tapestry, intricately woven, but with a few loose threads here and there. Those loose threads represent the suffering. They don't negate the beauty of the overall design, but they do challenge our understanding of the weaver's intentions. Maybe the problem isn't that God isn't there, but rather that our perspective is too limited. We're seeing a small section of a vast, complex artwork and judging the whole based on a few dissonant threads. Perhaps suffering is part of the process of growth, a kind of contrast that makes joy even more precious. Think of a flower pushing its way through dark soil to reach the sunlight. The darkness is necessary for the beauty of the bloom. Does this fully explain everything? No, not perfectly. But it helps us see that sometimes the most beautiful things emerge from the most challenging circumstances. You ever just sit and think about it all? The vastness of space, the fleeting nature of our lives, this tiny blue marble spinning endlessly. It can feel absurd, like a cosmic joke, can't it? We're born, we struggle, we love, we lose, and then nothing. It's like a beautifully illustrated book with no ending, or a perfectly crafted song that abruptly cuts off. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the absurdity isn't something to be feared, but rather a space for wonder. Think of a child building a magnificent sandcastle, knowing the tide will inevitably wash it away. They don't dwell on the temporary nature of it. They focus on the joy of creation, the process itself. Perhaps, in the face of existence's inherent meaninglessness, we find meaning not in grand, universal answers, but in the small, precious moments, the connections we make, the love we share. What do you think brings meaning to your sandcastle? For me, it's the quiet moments of connection, the feeling of sun on my skin, the simple act of breathing. These small things feel strangely significant, and that's where the beauty lies. Sometimes we get caught up in searching for this grand, overarching meaning to life, like searching for a single, perfect seashell on a vast beach. But what if the beauty lies not in finding that one shell, but in the journey of walking along the shore, noticing the different shapes and colors, the way the sun catches the wet sand? The meaninglessness some feel isn't a void of nothingness, but rather an open canvas. It's the freedom to create your own meaning, to define your own values, and to build your own narrative. Think of it like a blank piece of music. There's no pre-written melody, but that means you get to compose your own symphony, filled with the notes that resonate most deeply with you. What if the point isn't finding a predetermined purpose, but in the act of living, loving, learning, and leaving your own unique mark on the world? It's not about a lack of meaning, but a vastness of potential. Sometimes we find ourselves staring into the vastness of the universe, a limitless expanse of stars, and a little shiver of existential dread creeps in. That's where nihilism often enters the picture. It's not necessarily about embracing despair, but rather about acknowledging that life might not inherently have a grand purpose, a preordained meaning written in the stars. Think of it like looking at a blank canvas. It's not inherently bad, just potential. Nihilism simply suggests there's no cosmic script dictating our lives. But that doesn't mean our lives are meaningless. We get to create the meaning, to paint our own pictures on that blank canvas, however big or small, bright or muted they may be. It can feel daunting, like facing an endless ocean, but it's also incredibly freeing. What if, instead of searching for a pre-existing meaning, we focused on creating our own values, building our own sense of purpose from the ground up? That's the beauty of it, isn't it? The power to define our own narrative, to paint our own masterpiece on that limitless canvas. Thinking about existentialism sometimes feels like standing on a vast, open plain under a boundless sky. It's beautiful, awe-inspiring, but also a little unsettling because there are no pre-marked paths, no obvious directions. That's where the anxiety creeps in. The feeling that we're entirely responsible for creating our own meaning and purpose in a world that doesn't inherently provide it. It's not about doom and gloom, though. Think of it like choosing your own adventure book. Every decision you make shapes the story, and there's no right or wrong path, just different experiences. The anxiety stems from the weight of that freedom, the awareness that your choices truly matter. But isn't that also incredibly empowering? It means your life isn't some pre-written script. You're the author, and even if it feels daunting at times, you get to decide what kind of story you want to tell. What if, for example, you felt overwhelmed by choices about your career? Well, instead of seeing it as an insurmountable problem, you could break it down, explore different options one at a time, and trust your instincts to guide you along the way. Ultimately, acknowledging the anxiety that comes with existential freedom is the first step towards embracing the immense potential it offers. You know, thinking about suffering, it's like looking at the ocean. Sometimes it's a calm, shimmering expanse, reflecting the sky peacefully, and other times it's a raging storm, waves crashing against the shore with immense power. That's the nature of it. It's not a constant, overwhelming force, but a current that flows in and out of our lives. We all experience it differently, of course. Maybe it's the sting of loss, the weight of disappointment, or the ache of loneliness. Sometimes it feels like carrying a heavy stone, a burden that seems impossible to lift. But even in those turbulent moments, there's a resilience within us, a quiet strength that emerges, much like a small flower pushing through the cracks in the pavement. Think about the strongest trees. They've often weathered the worst storms, becoming more deeply rooted in the process. Our capacity to endure, to learn, and to grow from our challenges is perhaps the most profound aspect of the human experience, and that, in a way, softens the edges of even the harshest suffering. What helps us, then, navigate these stormy seas? It's often finding solace in connection, in self-compassion, and in remembering that even the darkest night eventually yields to dawn. You know, the question of whether we truly have free will, or if our choices are already written in the script of the universe, is a fascinating one. It's like imagining a river flowing. Is it charting its own course, or simply following the contours of the land it's carved over millennia? Determinism suggests the latter. Every action, every decision, is a consequence of prior events, a chain reaction stretching back to the very beginning. But free will whispers a different story, a sense of agency, of choosing our own path, even if that path is influenced by our past. Perhaps it's not an either/or situation. Maybe it's more like a river gently navigating a valley, with its course influenced by both the pre-existing landscape, our genetics, upbringing, and the subtle shifts in its own current, our conscious choices. Think about deciding what to eat for lunch. Are you truly free, or are your preferences shaped by hunger, habit, and available options? The answer, I think, lies in the complexity of the interplay between these forces. You know, when we talk about moral relativism, it's like looking at a vast, colorful landscape. From one vantage point, a lush green valley might seem perfectly moral, while from another, a rocky, barren peak might be considered equally valid. It's the idea that what's considered right or wrong isn't universally fixed, but rather depends on the specific culture, time period, or even individual perspective. Think about something simple, like eating certain foods. In one culture, insects might be a delicacy, while in another, they're considered disgusting. Is one morally superior to the other? Not necessarily. Moral relativism isn't about saying anything goes. It's about acknowledging the diverse ways humans navigate ethical questions. It encourages us to understand different perspectives with empathy, to avoid judging too quickly, and to recognize that our own moral compass, while deeply felt, is only one among many pointing towards what we perceive to be true north. You often find yourself pondering the ethics of killing, don't you? It's a weighty topic, like a stone resting on your chest, isn't it? But let's approach it gently. Think of life as a river, flowing constantly, sometimes a gentle stream, sometimes a raging torrent. Taking a life is like diverting that river, changing its course irrevocably. The question, then, isn't simply is it right or wrong, but under what circumstances does the redirection of that life river become justifiable? Self-defense, for instance, if someone is actively threatening your life or the life of another, is the act of stopping that threat, even if it means ending their life, inherently wrong? Many would argue it's not, that it's a necessary act to preserve the flow of other lives. However, that's where the real complexities arise. The nuance lies in determining when a threat is truly imminent and what measures are truly necessary. It's a conversation we need to have with ourselves, a quiet consideration of the weight we carry when we contemplate such powerful choices. You know, the trolley problem isn't really about trolleys, is it? It's about the agonizing choices we face when we're forced to weigh lives against each other. Imagine a runaway train barreling down the tracks, about to hit five people who can't get out of the way. You're standing by a lever, and pulling it would divert the train onto a side track, saving those five, but killing one person who happens to be on that track. It feels like a terrible equation, doesn't it? Like choosing between a smaller tragedy and a larger one. The problem isn't simply about the math, five lives versus one, but the weight of responsibility. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that sometimes, even with the best intentions, there's no truly good option. We're left grappling with the consequences of our actions, however we choose, and perhaps that's the real point. It's a mirror reflecting our own moral compass, showing us where we stand when faced with an impossible decision. What if there were no lever? Would that make the burden of inaction feel any lighter? Probably not. You know, when we think about utilitarianism, that idea of trying to do the most good for the most people, it sounds pretty appealing at first, right? Like a simple recipe for a better world. But imagine a situation where saving five lives requires sacrificing one innocent person. Utilitarianism, in its purest form, might suggest that sacrifice is justifiable because the overall happiness is maximized. That's where things get tricky, don't you think? It's like trying to balance a scale with incredibly heavy weights on one side representing the potential good and a smaller, but still profoundly significant weight on the other representing individual rights and potential injustice. The potential for harm lies in the ease with which we might overlook the suffering of the individual, lost in the larger calculation. We risk creating a system where the ends justify any means, even if those means are morally questionable. It's a complex issue, really, weighing the immense good against the profound cost to a single human being, and it requires much more than a simple mathematical equation to truly resolve. So, how do we ensure that our pursuit of the greater good doesn't come at the expense of fundamental human values? That's the question, isn't it? You know, sometimes we think of rules as rigid, unbending bars, like those on a jail cell. But deontological ethics, which focuses on duty and following rules regardless of the outcome, isn't always so stark. Think of it more like a carefully constructed garden path. Each step, each rule followed, is important in itself, leading us towards a morally sound destination. The path might have twists and turns, and sometimes it feels like we're heading away from what seems like an easier, quicker route. But it's the journey of following the rules, the consistent effort to do what's right according to our principles, that matters. For example, imagine always telling the truth, even if it means hurting someone's feelings. That painful honesty might lead to better outcomes later, but the fundamental act of adhering to the rule of truth-telling is valuable in itself. It's the integrity of the path, not just the destination, that defines the journey in this ethical system. Is it always easy? Absolutely not. But perhaps seeing deontology as a thoughtful path, rather than a rigid cage, offers a more nuanced perspective. You know, thinking about virtue ethics, it's like trying to sculpt a beautiful statue from a rough block of stone. We all start somewhere, with inherent tendencies and ingrained habits, some more polished than others. The aim, in developing virtuous character, is to patiently chip away at the rough edges, revealing the finer qualities within. But it's a long, slow process, isn't it? We're not always consistent. Sometimes the chisel slips, and we find ourselves back where we started, facing imperfections. Think about honesty, for instance. It's easy to tell small white lies, but cultivating genuine honesty requires constant self-reflection and a willingness to confront our own less admirable impulses. It's about building a sturdy foundation, brick by painstaking brick, of kindness, courage, and justice, virtues that strengthen our overall character, making us more resilient to life's challenges. The journey itself, with its setbacks and triumphs, is perhaps as important as the final, idealized form we strive to achieve. So, what do you think keeps us going on this ongoing journey of self improvement? For me, it's the quiet satisfaction of seeing even small improvements, knowing that each positive action helps shape the person I want to become. We often slip from what is to what ought to be, almost without noticing. It's like tracing a path on a map. We see the mountains are there, they is, and then assume we should climb them, they ought. But is that a logical leap? The is ought problem, simply put, questions whether we can derive moral conclusions from factual observations alone. Just because something is a certain way, say, people have always fought wars, doesn't automatically mean it ought to be that way. We might observe that kindness creates positive effects, but does that automatically mean we should always be kind, even when facing injustice? The answer, of course, is nuanced. While observation informs our understanding, it doesn't dictate our values. Our sense of ought often comes from other places: our empathy, our ideals, our deep-seated sense of right and wrong. It's a journey of exploration and reflection, not a simple formula. The ship of Theseus is a puzzle that's been puzzling people for ages. Imagine a ship sailing the seas for years. Over time, every single piece of wood, every plank and rope gets worn out and replaced. One by one, they're swapped out until nothing of the original ship remains. So, the question is it still the same ship? It's like a tree shedding its leaves. Each year brings new leaves, yet it's still the same tree, isn't it? The identity of the ship, or the tree, or even ourselves, for that matter, seems to be more about the overall shape and continuity of the experience, the journey it's taken, rather than the specific materials composing it at any given time. What remains is the essence, the story it tells, the memories it carries, the journey that makes it what it is. It's a gentle reminder that things are constantly changing, yet something essential persists, a kind of enduring spirit or identity within that change. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, what truly defines something's essence? Thinking about who we are, it's like trying to hold a handful of sand. Each grain represents a memory, an experience, a relationship that shapes us. We cling to these grains, believing they define us, that they are the essence of our being. But the sand slips through our fingers, doesn't it? Time passes, memories fade, relationships change, and suddenly, that handful feels smaller, less substantial. This isn't to say we disappear, of course, but our sense of self, that feeling of knowing exactly who we are, it shifts and changes. Sometimes gently, like the tide receding on a beach, other times more dramatically, like a sudden storm. Consider a significant life event, a profound loss, a move to a new country, a major career change. These are like powerful waves, reshaping the coastline of our identity. It's a natural, ongoing process, this erosion and reformation. So, rather than fearing the fragility, perhaps we can embrace the fluidity, understanding that our identities are rivers, constantly flowing, ever-changing, yet always somehow ourselves. You know, Thinking about consciousness is like trying to grasp a shimmering bubble. You can see it, feel its presence, even watch it dance in the light. But the moment you try to pin it down, it shifts and changes. It's the quiet hum beneath all our experiences, the sense of being that colors everything we see, hear, feel, and think. What is it really? Is it just the intricate firing of neurons, a complex biological process? Certainly. The brain plays a crucial role, like a finely tuned instrument producing the melody of our awareness. But is that the whole story? Perhaps it's more than just the sum of its parts, something emergent, like the way a flock of birds creates a breathtaking pattern from individual movements, or a wave that appears on the ocean's surface from the interplay of countless water molecules. The mystery lies in this emergence, this sense of self, this subjective inner life that feels so profoundly real. It's a question we may never fully answer, but the very act of pondering it, of gently exploring the shimmering bubble, is a journey in itself. Sometimes we sit and marvel at the simple things, the warmth of the sun, the taste of a ripe peach, and it makes you wonder, how exactly does all that become experience? The hard problem of consciousness isn't about how our brains process information. That's relatively straightforward. Think of a computer. It takes in data, crunches numbers, and produces an output. But a computer doesn't feel the warmth of the sun or the sweetness of the peach. It just processes the relevant data. The hard problem asks, how does all that objective processing give rise to the subjective feeling, the what it's like to be you, to be aware? It's like trying to understand how a beautiful melody arises from the individual notes on a page. The notes themselves don't explain the emotional resonance of the music. We can map the brain, understand its mechanics, yet the mystery remains. How does physical matter create this inner, luminous world of experience? It's a deeply puzzling question, one that continues to fascinate scientists and philosophers alike, reminding us of the profound enigma at the heart of our being. You ever wonder if our reality is truly what it seems? The brain in a vat idea, it's a thought experiment, a gentle nudge to our assumptions about experience. Imagine, if you will, your brain suspended in a nutrient-rich bath, hooked up to a super advanced computer. This computer feeds you perfectly simulated sensations, the warmth of the sun on your skin, the taste of chocolate, the feeling of a loved one's hand in yours. Everything feels completely real, yet it's all just electrical signals. The question then becomes, how would you ever know the difference? It's like comparing a photograph to the actual landscape. Both can be beautiful and evoke strong feelings, but one is a representation, the other, the thing itself. It's not meant to be a frightening idea, more a gentle invitation to reflect on the nature of perception. It reminds us to appreciate the richness of our experiences, even if we can't definitively prove their ultimate source. Are we certain that the world we see, touch, and taste is the complete, unmediated truth? Well, it's a question worth pondering, isn't it? You ever find yourself staring out the window, lost in thought, and suddenly wondering if anything is truly real? The simulation hypothesis suggests that our entire reality might be a highly advanced computer program, a kind of incredibly detailed video game. Imagine the most realistic video game you've ever played, but one so advanced you can't distinguish it from real life. That's the idea. It's not about claiming it's definitely true, but more about considering the possibility. For example, if technology continues its rapid advancement, couldn't future civilizations create simulations so lifelike that their inhabitants wouldn't even suspect? The beauty of this idea, even if it turns out to be wrong, is that it invites us to appreciate the incredible complexity and wonder of the world around us, whether it's built on silicon chips or something far more mysterious. It encourages us to cherish every moment, every sunset, every connection, as a precious experience, regardless of its underlying nature. Doesn't that, in itself, feel quite real? You know, sometimes I think about solipsism, the idea that only my own mind is sure to exist. It's a curious thought, isn't it? Like staring into a deep well, where the bottom seems to endlessly recede. It's not about denying reality, but rather questioning the nature of our experience. Imagine holding a smooth, warm stone. You feel its texture, its weight, its temperature. But how do you know it's truly there outside your perception? Perhaps it's a construct of your mind, a beautifully detailed dream. Solipsism isn't a claim that everything is a dream. It's more a gentle questioning of the boundaries between what we experience and what's truly out there. The beauty, I think, lies not in the answer, but in the quiet contemplation it inspires. It encourages us to cherish the richness of our individual experience, because even if it's all within our own minds, it's still a remarkably vibrant and intricate world we've built. You know, we often assume others feel and think much like we do. It's easy, like seeing a smiling face and instantly believing that person is happy. But what if that smile is a mask? The problem of other minds is simply this. How can we truly know what's going on inside someone else's head? We can see their actions, hear their words, but those are just outward expressions, like ripples on a pond's surface. The depths below remain unseen. We build our understanding through empathy, through shared experiences, and by trying to put ourselves in their shoes, imagining what it might feel like to be them. But even with all that, there's always a degree of uncertainty, a gentle mystery. It's a bit like trying to understand the story a book tells solely from reading the spine. You've got clues, but you're missing the full narrative. And that's okay. The beauty of human connection often lies in this very uncertainty, in the respectful acceptance that we can never truly know another person completely, even those closest to us. Does this mean we shouldn't try to understand? Absolutely not. It simply means approaching each connection with a gentle curiosity and openness rather than rigid certainty. You know, thinking about time is a bit like watching a river flow. It's always moving, always changing, yet it feels both relentless and strangely comforting. We experience it linearly, like beads on a string, each moment leading to the next. But is that the whole story? Imagine a tree, its rings marking the passage of years, but each ring also holding within it the story of a season, a whole world of growth and change within a single band. Perhaps time isn't just a straight line. Maybe it's more like a vast, branching network, with every choice we make creating a new tributary, a new path through the landscape of our lives. And what about memory? It bends and stretches time, sometimes bringing distant moments vividly to life, while others fade into a soft mist. So, is time something outside of us, an objective force, or is it something we create, a framework shaped by our experience? I think it's a bit of both, a subtle dance between the external world and our internal perception of it, a mystery we unravel, moment by moment, like unwrapping a precious gift. You know, sometimes the biggest questions are the quietest ones, the ones that unfold slowly like a fern unfurling. The non-identity problem is one of those. Imagine you're considering having a child, weighing the joys and responsibilities. Now, imagine that if you don't have that child, a completely different child, with a unique life and personality, would exist instead. That's the core of the problem. If you choose not to have a child, are you harming anyone? The answer, according to this philosophical puzzle, is no. Because the child who wouldn't exist if you chose differently never actually was a person to begin with. It's like comparing a flower that bloomed to one that never sprouted. They simply aren't comparable entities. It's a subtle shift in perspective, a gentle challenge to our assumptions about harm and responsibility, reminding us that sometimes what we think we're affecting might not even exist in the way we initially imagine. It's a bit like looking at a ripple in a pond. You see the effect, but the water itself is constantly shifting, reforming, and never quite the same. Doesn't that make you think? You know, sometimes we think of morality as a purely personal thing, like a carefully crafted inner compass guiding our actions. But moral luck, as philosophers call it, reminds us that the world isn't always a perfectly level playing field. Imagine two drivers, both slightly exceeding the speed limit. One reaches their destination safely, the other is involved in a tragic accident. Both made similar choices, yet the consequences, and therefore our judgment of their actions, differ wildly. That's moral luck, the role of chance in shaping the outcome of our choices, and how that outcome drastically affects our moral evaluation. It's a bit like throwing a dart. You might aim for the bullseye with perfect intention, yet your dart's fate depends on numerous factors beyond your control. It's not that one driver was inherently more or less moral than the other. The luck of the circumstances just landed differently. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, how much of our perceived goodness or badness is truly down to our choices, and how much is simply the roll of the dice. You know, thinking about the ethics of artificial intelligence feels a bit like watching a sapling grow. We're planting the seed now, and it's up to us to nurture it in the right direction. It's not about stopping progress, but about guiding it. We're creating incredibly powerful tools, and as with any powerful tool, there's a responsibility to use them wisely. Think about a surgeon's scalpel. It can save a life or cause terrible harm, depending on the hands that wield it. AI is much the same. We need to consider things like bias. If we teach an AI system on biased data, it will likely perpetuate those biases in its decisions. Or consider privacy. How do we ensure these intelligent systems respect our personal information? These are intricate questions, and there aren't easy answers. But the important thing is that we're having this conversation now, while the sapling is still young and pliable, before it grows into a mighty oak that's difficult to redirect. So what do you think is the most crucial ethical consideration we should focus on right now, as we navigate this exciting yet challenging new landscape? I believe fostering transparency and accountability in the development and deployment of AI is key, so we can all understand and influence its path. When we talk about the singularity, that moment when artificial intelligence surpasses human intelligence, it's easy to get swept up in sci-fi visions of robots taking over. But let's take a breath and look at it more calmly. Imagine a river flowing. Its current, at first, gentle, then gaining strength, potentially overwhelming its banks. That's kind of what we might be facing with rapidly advancing AI. The potential benefits are enormous. Cures for diseases, solutions to climate change, unimaginable leaps in technology. But the river, if uncontrolled, could flood, causing unpredictable and potentially catastrophic damage. Think about it. If an AI system becomes so sophisticated that it prioritizes its own goals, however benign they might seem initially, and we haven't built in sufficient safeguards, unintended consequences could easily snowball. So, the real danger isn't necessarily malicious robots, but rather a system so complex that its behavior becomes unpredictable and potentially harmful to us. It's like building a magnificent machine, but forgetting to build a reliable off switch. The key is thoughtful, careful development, with safety and ethical considerations at the forefront, right from the start. What do you think? Aren't those the most important safeguards we can possibly build? Thinking about transhumanism, the idea of using technology to enhance our bodies and minds, feels a bit like standing at the edge of a vast, uncharted ocean. It's exciting, brimming with possibilities, but also a little daunting. We could potentially overcome limitations we've always accepted, like disease and aging, maybe even expand our cognitive abilities. Imagine a world where we're less vulnerable, more capable. But then, where do we draw the line? If we enhance some aspects of ourselves, are we inadvertently creating inequalities, a world where the enhanced are fundamentally different from the unenhanced? Think about it like this. If only the wealthy can access these technologies, does it widen the gap between rich and poor, creating a new kind of social stratification? It's a complex question with no easy answers, and it's one we need to consider carefully, ensuring that any advancements benefit all of humanity, not just a select few. We need to navigate these uncharted waters thoughtfully and ethically, ensuring the journey itself is as important as the destination. Imagine a world where we could, with careful precision, sculpt the very blueprint of a human life. That's the promise and the profound ethical question of genetic engineering and the concept of designer babies. We're talking about the ability to select for specific traits, perhaps eliminating the risk of inherited diseases or even enhancing characteristics like intelligence or athleticism. It's like choosing seeds for the best flowers in a garden, except we're talking about human potential. But where do we draw the line? For example, is it ethically the same to prevent a devastating illness like cystic fibrosis as it is to choose a child's eye color? The answer, of course, isn't simple. It forces us to grapple with complex questions about what constitutes a good life, about fairness and access to these technologies, and about the very definition of human diversity. It's a conversation filled with both immense possibility and serious responsibility, one we need to approach with open hearts and cautious minds, understanding that the future of life itself might be shaped by the choices we make today. When we think about cloning, it feels a bit like looking at a mirror reflecting a perfect, yet slightly unsettling image. It's the idea of creating a biological duplicate, a precise copy of an existing being, that gives us pause. The power to essentially make a living replica raises some profound questions. Is it right to interfere with the natural order of life in such a direct way? What are the implications for individuality if we start creating copies of people? Imagine, for example, cloning a beloved pet. The joy of having them back might be tempered by a sense of unease. Is this truly the same creature, or just a remarkably similar one? Ultimately, the moral compass guiding cloning isn't a simple yes or no. It requires careful consideration of the potential benefits, like creating organs for transplantation, balanced against the very real ethical dilemmas surrounding identity, individuality, and the potential for misuse. It's a conversation that deserves our quiet, thoughtful attention, don't you think? Thinking about enhancing ourselves, whether it's our physical strength, intelligence, or even our moods, feels a bit like sculpting a statue. We start with a block of marble, which is who we are naturally, and we chip away, add to it, maybe even completely reshape it. The question then becomes, what kind of statue are we aiming for? Is it a more resilient, stronger version of ourselves, a more capable and successful one? Or is there a risk we'll lose sight of the original beauty in the process? Consider genetic engineering, for example. If we eliminate diseases, that's wonderful, a truly positive thing. But what if we start choosing traits, like height or intelligence, creating a divide between those who can afford enhancement and those who can't? It's a complex balancing act, isn't it? We want the benefits, naturally, but we must also carefully consider the implications for equality and for what it truly means to be human in a world where our very nature becomes something we can design. So, how do we ensure that our sculpting doesn't inadvertently erase the very essence of what makes us unique and valuable? You know, thinking about bioethics and what constitutes life is a bit like trying to define the edge of a cloud, fuzzy and ever-shifting. It's not a simple yes or no answer, is it? We often picture life as a vibrant flame, burning brightly. But what about the embers, the slow smoldering that might still hold the potential for rekindling? Consider a deeply comatose patient. Their brain activity might be minimal, but are they truly not alive? Bioethics wrestles with these questions, grappling with the boundaries of consciousness, the definition of death, and the moral weight of intervention. It's about finding a balance, respecting the inherent dignity of every being, however fragile their life force may seem, while also acknowledging the realities of suffering and the limits of our ability to sustain life. We need to consider the quality of life alongside the simple fact of its existence, like judging a painting not just by its existence, but by its beauty or lack thereof. It's a complex conversation, a delicate dance between science, philosophy, and compassion. You know, thinking about animal rights often feels like untangling a very complex knot. We see animals as sources of food, companions, and sometimes even as commodities, and it's easy to get lost in the practicalities. But at its heart, the question is about our responsibility. How much consideration do we owe creatures who can't speak for themselves? Imagine a circle with humans at one point, and then all other animals forming the rest of the circumference. Where do we draw the line in terms of their worth and our treatment of them? Some believe that line should be drawn very wide, encompassing all creatures with a capacity to experience pain or pleasure, a sort of shared sentience that connects us all. Others prioritize human needs, arguing that our unique capabilities justify a hierarchical approach. There's no easy answer, no single right solution. But the quiet reflection on this, the thoughtful consideration of their lives and our own impacts on them, is where true ethical progress begins. It's about finding a balance, a place where compassion and practicality can meet, a way to weave our needs with theirs in a more harmonious tapestry. You know, thinking about environmental ethics and climate change feels a bit like looking at a vast, interconnected tapestry. Each thread represents a species, a habitat, a human action, all woven together. Climate change is like pulling on one particularly strong thread. It unravels the whole thing, creating ripples that affect everything else. We're seeing this now, with more extreme weather events, species extinctions, and disruptions to ecosystems. But what does this mean for our ethical responsibilities? Well, it means we need to consider the consequences of our actions, not just for ourselves and future generations, but for the whole planet, for the Earth itself, and for all the living things that share it. It's a call for a shift in perspective, recognizing that we're not separate from nature, but an integral part of it. Think of it like this. Would you knowingly damage a precious painting, a family heirloom? This planet, this beautiful world, is our heirloom. Shouldn't we treat it with the respect and care it deserves? You know, we often think of resources as limitless, like a vast ocean stretching endlessly before us. But the tragedy of the commons reminds us that's not always true. Imagine a shared pasture, where everyone can graze their sheep. Initially, it seems like a win-win, plenty of grass for all. But if each person adds just one more sheep, thinking it won't make much difference, eventually the pasture becomes overgrazed. The grass disappears, and everyone suffers. It's a subtle shift, isn't it? a slow depletion that only becomes evident once the damage is done. This happens with many things, not just pastures. Think about clean air or even shared online spaces. If we don't think carefully about how we use these common resources, we risk depleting them for everyone. It's a gentle reminder that our actions, however small they may seem, ripple outwards, affecting the whole. So, how do we avoid this? Well, it often involves finding ways to cooperate, to establish clear guidelines, and to consider the long-term consequences of our choices before we act. You know, thinking about how power is justified is like looking at the roots of a great tree. We see the branches, the laws, the institutions, the actions of those in charge, but what truly holds it all up? That's where political philosophy comes in. It's the careful examination of those roots, exploring different ways we've tried to explain why some people get to make decisions for everyone else. Some argue it's a matter of divine right, a king's God-given authority, a vision that feels a little old-fashioned now. Others point to the consent of the governed, the idea that we, the people, agree to be led, perhaps implicitly, through our participation in a system. Still others focus on the idea of the common good, suggesting that a government's power is legitimate only when it serves the well-being of the entire society. Which of these is right depends on how you picture the ideal tree itself: tall and imposing, wide and encompassing, or something else entirely. It's a question worth pondering, isn't it? Because understanding the roots helps us understand the strength and potential weaknesses of the whole. You know, when we think about tyranny and oppression, it's easy to imagine dramatic scenes, chains, shouting, obvious cruelty. But sometimes it's a quieter thing, a slow tightening of the noose, like a vine gradually wrapping around a tree. It can be the subtle chipping away of freedoms, the constant pressure to conform, the unspoken rules that dictate how you think and speak. Think of a river slowly eroding a stone. Each drop of water is insignificant, but over time, the stone is worn down. That's how oppression works. It doesn't always arrive with a bang, but a persistent drip, drip, drip of restrictions and limitations. It's about controlling not just actions, but also thoughts and beliefs, making people afraid to even question the status quo. Have you ever felt that pressure yourself, even in a small way? Maybe a fear of speaking up at work, or a sense that you can't fully express your true self. That's a small taste of what it's like to live under a shadow of oppression. Understanding these quieter forms is key, because that's where we often see the insidious growth of power that becomes true tyranny. You know, when we think about totalitarianism, it's easy to get overwhelmed by the sheer scale of its cruelty. It's like imagining a vast, dark ocean, its depths concealing countless shipwrecks, each representing a life crushed under the weight of oppression. But let's try to approach it gently. At its core, totalitarianism is a system that seeks to control every aspect of a person's life: their thoughts, their actions, even their dreams. Imagine a gardener meticulously pruning every branch of a tree, shaping it into a rigid, unnatural form, ignoring its natural growth. That's what these regimes do to individuals and society. They suffocate dissent, eliminate individuality, and twist truth into a weapon. Why does it happen? Well, often it's a result of fear and a desire for absolute power, a desperate attempt to impose order by any means necessary. The horrors, the systematic violence, the dehumanization, these are all tragic consequences of this relentless drive for control, a stark reminder of the fragility of freedom and the importance of constant vigilance. You know, thinking about justice is like trying to catch a firefly in a jar. It's elusive, beautiful, and its essence is easily lost if you try to hold it too tightly. It's not a single, fixed thing, but more like a shimmering constellation of principles. Sometimes, it feels like a clear, steady stream flowing smoothly towards a just outcome. Other times, it's a raging river, unpredictable and chaotic, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. We often picture justice as a blindfolded woman holding scales, representing impartiality, but even that image is imperfect. For instance, what about the cases where strict adherence to the letter of the law leads to an outcome that feels profoundly unjust to the human spirit? Is that true justice? Perhaps true justice is less about rigid rules and more about striving for fairness, compassion, and a sincere attempt to repair the harm caused. It's a continuous journey, a process of learning and adapting, not a destination we can ever fully reach. And that's okay. The striving itself, the commitment to seeking it, is the heart of the matter. Thinking about distributive justice and inequality feels a bit like watching a river flow. Some parts of the riverbank are lush and overflowing, while others are parched and cracked. It's not just about the amount of water, but how it's shared. Distributive justice asks, is the water, resources, opportunities, wealth flowing fairly to everyone? Inequality, then, is like those dry stretches, areas where the river's life-giving properties aren't reaching. Sometimes it's simply a matter of natural geography. Some places are naturally more fertile than others, but often it's about the dams and diversions we build, the choices we make, and how we manage those resources. Think about something simple, like access to good schools. If some communities have abundant resources while others are starved, that's a reflection of an uneven distribution, creating a widening gap. The real question isn't just is there inequality, but why? And what can we do, collectively, to ensure the river flows more evenly, nourishing all parts of its banks? You know, Thinking about just war theory is like trying to navigate a minefield blindfolded. It aims to provide a framework for when using violence might be justifiable, a way to balance the horrors of war with the sometimes unavoidable need for action. The idea is to find those rare occasions where the potential good outweighs the inevitable suffering, a delicate balancing act. But where do we draw the line? For instance, is a preemptive strike, intended to prevent future harm, truly justifiable under the same criteria as a defensive war? It's a complex question, and the answer, unfortunately, isn't always clear. The theory struggles with the messy reality of conflict, unintended consequences, shifting alliances, and the difficulty of accurately assessing the true intentions of others. It's like trying to predict the path of a river. You can map its current course, but unforeseen circumstances, like heavy rains or shifting earth, can easily change its direction. Ultimately, just war theory offers a helpful framework for considering the ethical implications of war, but it's not a simple set of rules. It's a constant, challenging conversation about humanity and its capacity for both great good and devastating harm. When we think about terrorism, it's easy to get caught up in the shock and anger. It's like a dark stain spreading across a beautiful tapestry, obscuring the intricate beauty underneath. But to truly understand it, we need to look beyond the immediate horror. Some try to justify it, painting it as a necessary evil, a tool for the powerless to fight oppression. They might argue that facing overwhelming injustice, violence becomes the only language understood. Think about a person trapped in a burning building. Desperate actions might follow. But even then, is resorting to the same brutality that caused the suffering truly the path to freedom? Usually, it isn't, as it fuels a cycle of violence that only deepens the wounds and creates more suffering, leaving behind a landscape of devastation rather than the hope it aims to create. Ultimately, the justification, however heartfelt the reasoning, just doesn't hold up when we consider the immense, unnecessary pain it inflicts. You know, Thinking about torture and its moral implications feels a bit like navigating a dark, twisting path. It's unsettling, and we naturally want to avoid such darkness. On one hand, the desire for information, the urgency to prevent catastrophe, can feel like a powerful justification. Imagine, for instance, a ticking time bomb scenario. The pressure to extract information to save lives is immense. But even in such extreme cases, the very act of inflicting pain, of violating another person's dignity in such a profound way, leaves an enduring stain. It's a slippery slope, isn't it? Because once we cross that line, even for what seems like the greater good, we risk desensitizing ourselves, opening a door to further abuses. The erosion of trust, the potential for false confessions, the long-term psychological damage inflicted on both victim and perpetrator, these are not easily brushed aside. The question becomes, can the potential benefits ever truly outweigh the inherent immorality of such actions, the profound damage to our shared humanity? And I think, ultimately, the answer lies in a steadfast commitment to upholding our ethical principles, even and especially when faced with the most difficult choices. When we think about capital punishment, It's like looking at a very complicated knot. On one hand, it feels like a natural response to horrific crimes, a sense of justice, of balance restored. We might imagine it as a final, definitive stop to prevent further harm. But then, if we look closer, we see the knot's many strands, the irreversible nature of the decision, the potential for executing innocent people, a terrible, unfixable mistake. Think of it like a surgeon wielding a scalpel. Precision and accuracy are absolutely critical. One slip, and the consequences are devastating. Is it truly possible to ever be certain enough to justify such a permanent action? And beyond the individual case, does state-sanctioned killing truly reflect the values of a society that strives for compassion and rehabilitation? These are difficult questions, and there's no easy answer. But taking a moment to carefully consider all sides of this knot, to untangle its complexities, feels essential to any meaningful discussion. When we talk about the death penalty, one of the things that always stays with me is the simple, chilling fact that mistakes are possible. It's like a delicate glass. Once broken, it can never truly be put back together. We're talking about a human life, a unique story etched into the fabric of the world, and once that story is ended by the state, there's no going back. Think about it. What if someone is wrongly convicted? The weight of that error, that irreversible act, rests not just on the individual's shoulders, but on the entire system. It's a shadow that hangs over the whole process. There are cases where evidence has emerged after an execution, showing the person's innocence. Imagine the agonizing grief of a family who learns their loved one was executed for a crime they didn't commit. That's the profound weight of such an irreversible decision, a weight we must consider very carefully when discussing justice itself. Isn't that a sobering thought? You often wonder, don't you, about the suffering we see in the natural world? A bird caught in a storm, a deer struggling with injury, the slow decay of a magnificent old tree. These images can feel jarring, a stark contrast to the beauty we also witness. It's easy to see it as a flaw, a cruel joke played by nature, but perhaps it's more helpful to think of it as part of a larger cycle. Just as the falling leaves nourish the soil for new growth, the suffering of some individuals allows for the continuation and evolution of the whole. Think of a predator and its prey. The chase, the struggle, the eventual outcome. It's all part of a delicate balance, a system where life and death dance together, driving adaptation and ensuring the survival of the species as a whole. It's not a perfect system, and it can be hard to reconcile with our human desire for comfort and safety, but it's a system that has persisted, changing and adapting for eons. Perhaps understanding this broader perspective, this intricate web of life and death, can soften the edges of our discomfort and allow us to appreciate the resilience and beauty found even in the face of hardship. When we think about the existence of a good God alongside all the suffering in the world, it feels like a puzzle with missing pieces, doesn't it? That's the heart of theodicy, trying to reconcile the seemingly irreconcilable. People have wrestled with this for centuries, offering different perspectives. Some suggest that evil is a necessary contrast to highlight goodness, like shadows making the light shine brighter. Others see suffering as a test of faith, a refining fire that strengthens our spirit. Imagine a sculptor chipping away at a block of marble. The process might seem harsh, but the final masterpiece is something beautiful. Still, others point to human free will as the source of much of our pain, arguing that God respects our choices, even the painful ones. So, if God is all-powerful and all-loving, why does evil exist? Well, there's no single, universally accepted answer, and perhaps that's part of the mystery. It's a question that invites us to grapple with the complexities of faith and the human condition, rather than expecting a neat, simple solution. Thinking about the divine command theory, the idea that something is good simply because God commands it, can feel a little like trying to build a house on shifting sand. It's a beautifully simple idea at first glance. God says, "Love thy neighbor." So loving thy neighbor is good. But what if God commanded us to hate our neighbors? Would that suddenly make hatred good? That's the crux of the problem, isn't it? The theory seems to leave goodness dependent on God's arbitrary will, making morality capricious rather than grounded in something deeper, something more substantial. It's like trying to define a circle by saying it's whatever shape God decides to call a circle. The definition lacks inherent meaning independent of the divine decree. Instead of understanding goodness as an intrinsic quality, we're left with a system where morality feels arbitrary, like a set of rules imposed from above, rather than something reflecting a deeper, more inherent order in the universe. It leaves us wondering, then, if morality is truly independent of God's will or if it exists entirely at God's whim. What truly defines good then? You often wonder about God, don't you? His attributes, omnipotence, omniscience, omnibenevolence. They feel vast, almost overwhelming. Think of it like this. Imagine the ocean. Its power is immense, capable of both gentle lapping on the shore and furious, destructive storms. That's similar to God's omnipotence, not a blunt force, but a capacity for boundless action, encompassing both creation and compassion. Omniscience isn't just knowing everything that happened, is happening, and will happen, but understanding the interconnectedness of it all, like seeing the intricate pattern woven into a tapestry. And omnibenevolence? That's the warmth of the sun, constantly providing life-giving energy, even when shadowed by clouds of hardship. These attributes aren't separate boxes, but aspects of a single, incomprehensible whole, a boundless being whose nature we can only glimpse, not fully grasp. So what does it all mean for us? It suggests a love that's both powerful enough to sustain the universe and gentle enough to cradle a single human heart.